We are very grateful to be hearing from Maxim Vishev. Maxim is a teaching associate with the Monash Bioethics Centre, pursuing a career as a professional philosopher. His current research focuses on metaethics, addressing the question, which facts of reality ground an ethical theory? He has given presentations on human lifespan extension, bioethics, the history of philosophy and poetry, and if I'm right, has just been awarded a scholarship to pursue a PhD at ANU.
Correct.
Congratulations, Maxim.
Thank you. Well done. Congratulations. Thank you.
Today, we're going to be hearing from Maxim about life as an end in itself, a critique of utilitarian metaethics. And with that, I'll hand over to Maxim.
Thank you, Nathan. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for inviting me today. So I'll be presenting on what my proposed PhD research topic is currently at ANU, where I have, as Nathan mentioned, been awarded a PhD place on scholarship. So very happy about that. The topic is very likely to change as I continue with my studies, but I'm presenting on the proposal that got me the place. So I still think it's a very important topic to cover. Let's get started. Now, I know we have very little time, and I want to cover a three-part thesis in half an hour, while also presenting an extremely controversial, radical moral theory, which has currently virtually no representation in academia, and which I hope to correct. So I will allow a lot of time for questions. Nathan, would you mind telling me when I have 10 minutes and 5 minutes left?
Sure.
Okay. I can't change slides. Hang on. There we go. Okay, so my thesis has three parts. To clarify, what is metaethics? Metaethics is the study of where ethics comes from, what facts give rise to the need for a particular ethical theory. Now, I claim that utilitarian metaethics commits two basic, let's say, fallacies. It has two basic problems. One is failure to differentiate the standard of ethics from the purpose of ethics. And the other is the tendency of utilitarianism to regard the totality of all pleasure and pain as if it were a single unit. So everybody's pleasure and everybody's pain is just aggregated into some one unit, and we try to optimize it. There's no discussion of who deserves to feel anything or who deserves anything at all, really. Virtue is just measured by how much pleasure or pain you bring to others. I will also, so that's the first part of my thesis. The second part of my thesis is me presenting my own 4 principles for deriving a moral code from the facts of reality. Now, if you want to ask me in the Q&A why any moral code is necessitated by the facts of reality, that's a good question. In other words, you could ask, why not be a moral relativist? And I would be very happy to discuss that. The third part of my thesis is a defense of the objective. This is the controversial part. Well, I guess it's all controversial, but the third part is a defense of the objectivist approach to deriving ethics from the nature of living organisms, and specifically humans, developed by Ayn Rand, whose philosophy I am in agreement with. And for 5 years, while I pursued my Bachelor of Arts and Master of Bioethics, I kept these beliefs of mine relatively closeted. And now I'm very happy to finally come out of the closet, so to speak. Okay. All right, so part 1, a critique of utilitarian metaethics. I already mentioned this in the introduction, but what is the claim that integrates the two errors I pointed out? It's that pleasure cannot be the standard of ethics because it is not a metaphysical primary. What is a metaphysical primary? By the way, I feel a little bit like Orpheus in the underworld right now because trying to rescue Eurydice, because I have no time to defend any of the claims I'm making. I'm accounting for the half-hour time limit. So I'm just going to present a bunch of controversial claims and then look forward to being attacked in the Q&A. So what is pleasure? Pleasure for a human being is a psychophysiological state. It is a combination of sensations experienced as positive at the immediate perceptual level. Now, I looked up pleasure, the definition of it, in the Oxford Dictionary yesterday, and it gives a really bad definition because it says it's a state of feeling or being happy or satisfied. Well, I thought, interesting. I wonder what the definition of happy would be. And then the definition of happy is feeling or showing pleasure or contentment. So there's a circularity. You can't define A in terms of B and then define B in terms of A. If you would like to know how to properly define a term, happy to answer that too, but it involves identifying the genus and differentia, which was a principle discovered by Aristotle. So we can't give a perfect definition of pleasure because it refers to a category of sensations. And there's just, because sensations precede the conceptual level, it's very difficult to talk about in terms of concepts. Okay. So why do I claim that pleasure is not a metaphysical primary? What does it mean to say that anything is a metaphysical primary? Well, entities are metaphysical primaries. Pleasure is not an entity. An entity is just a thing. For example, I'm an entity, the string bottle is an entity. An attribute is an inseparable aspect, an inseparable characteristic of a thing, such as its color. You can paint this string bottle, but you can't change the fact that it has a given color at a given time. However, color does not pertain to all entities. For example, my consciousness doesn't have a color. It does, however, have other types of attributes that other physical entities don't have. So the nature of the types of attributes that an entity can have is determined by the nature of that entity. So what is pleasure then? Well, it's not an entity and it's not an attribute. It's a state. It's a temporary state, a state possible to a living organism that has a pleasure-pain mechanism. Entities are metaphysical primaries. The entities with which the science of ethics is concerned are, of course, humans, because we choose our actions. So states, attributes, substances, causes, these are all certain types of things relating to entities, but entities are the metaphysical primaries. So you cannot start by saying a certain state is desirable and saying that's just self-evident. It is not at all self-evident that pleasure is desirable. You can think of all kinds of examples where pleasure is very bad for you, and where pain is actually a sign of something good. For instance, a drug addict taking drugs experiences pleasure. That is objectively harmful to their life. A person at the gym lifting heavy weights experiences pain. That is objectively beneficial for their life. Just a very kind of quick summary. So let's look at how ethics is approached. And this is based on my own studies here at Monash and elsewhere. When you start as an undergrad, you're basically asked, you're told about these various ethical theories. You're told about utilitarianism, Kantianism, virtue ethics. You're not told about objectivism, but that is also an ethical system, the one I endorse. You're also told a little bit about moral relativism and the view that, well, there is actually no morality. It's just a matter of subjective preference. Now, the question is, how do you decide? So you're taught as an undergraduate, this is what the various ethical theories hold, and this is how they would apply to all these various cases. How should you decide which one you should be? And there's really no discussion of that. That is the question of metaethics. So the question of metaethics is, which facts tell us which moral theory is true? Because it's like religion. You know, all the religions claim that they all make mutually exclusive claims about which God is real. They can't all be correct. Well, it's the same here with even secular moral theories. If there is one reality and everything is interconnected, then there can only be one true ethical system. Now, again, I'm happy to explain why there has to be one and not zero in the Q&A. All right, so part two, the four principles. How much time do I have, Nathan?
You're at 6 minutes.
I'm at 6 minutes. Okay, good. I'm going better than I thought. So how do we approach deriving ethics from reality? This is the second part of my thesis. And I just think that these four principles are kind of necessary. I just thought about the issue of, let's say you're a philosopher looking afresh at reality. How should you figure out how you should live? After all, that is the question of ethics. Well, here are four principles that I advance, and I just don't see how they could be otherwise. If you think they could be, I'd like to hear it. Again, the main reason I'm here today is to hear your critiques. So one is you have to omit value-laden claims from establishing standards of morality. What that means is you can't steal concepts. You cannot introduce morality into the derivation of morality. For instance, you can't say, well, it's just a fact of reality that human beings have to treat each other with respect, because that already presupposes a morality, that it presupposes all sorts of beliefs about the desirability of respect and about human relationships and so on. That may be true, but you can't derive it just from it's circular to try to introduce moral principles into developing moral principles. So that's number one. Number two is you have to identify teleological ends in reality. What kinds of goals are trying to be achieved in reality? This is a question Ayn Rand asks and answers very successfully. She says there's only one class of entities that pursues goals, and those are living organisms. And we'll get to that later. So three is to identify how these ends are achieved, by what means. And specifically, as we'll see, since ethics studies the nature of human action, we have to ask how a volitional consciousness, how a consciousness that has free will, chooses to act in order to achieve these ends, or chooses not to act in order to achieve these ends. And four, we must demonstrate that choosing to act for ends other than those identified in two, that is reality-based ends, or by means other than those stipulated in three, which means reality-based methods, that is rationality, at least that's what I will be arguing, would mean acting against a rational principle and against reality and against the requirements of life. Now, this is very different to any kind of Kantian formulation, which tries to separate rationality from reality. And you can ask me about that too in the Q&A if you wish. All right. So kind of moving on to part three now. The first question, according to Objectivism, is not which moral code does one require? That is not the first question. The first question is, well, I'll let anybody guess. Can anybody guess which question hierarchically precedes this? Before we can ask which moral code does one require, we have to ask,
why? Why do we need a moral code?
Correct. Why do we need a moral code at all? Yes. So before you go to an ice cream shop and select an ice cream, you have to decide to go to the ice cream shop. Yes. So except here, it's a far more important issue. That's right, Adrian. So the foundation of ethics, according to Objectivism, is to first ask, what facts of reality create the need for a concept of ethics? Now, you might notice that there is already a supposition of a need, which is in a sense a moral concept, not necessarily a moral concept, it's a value-related concept. So a need is a requirement of an organism's life. So we are really asking two questions in order. One, what facts of reality create the need for an ethics? And then, if we identify that there are any such facts, we have to ask two, which is, which code of ethics do these facts require? So what does the concept of value presuppose? This really goes to the heart of one of my most devastating critiques against utilitarianism and against actually any morality of altruism, which is basically all moralities. Virtue ethics has a special place in my heart, but it still commits certain errors. So what does the concept of value presuppose? One is a valuer, that is a living organism, an individual living organism. Two is an alternative. If you have no alternative about whether you get something or not, you can't really consider it a value. For instance, immortality as a value, when it's not possible, makes no sense. Three, a standard of value. How do you judge what is a value to you? So you cannot talk about value without asking two corollary questions. Value to whom and for what? All other living organisms act to achieve their values automatically. A plant the reason I had a plant up on the first slide is because a plant is, in a sense, a perfect egoist. A plant does exactly what it needs to do to survive. It may not succeed, but it does the only thing it can, and that thing is to operate in such a manner as to sustain its life. It turns its leaves towards the sun, it plunges its roots down into the soil to extract water and nutrients. Now, if you look at higher animals, they do the same thing. They just do it by different means and they move around and they have their own means of survival. But human beings don't have any kind of automatic guidance on what to do. We come into the world with the capacity to develop a rational faculty, which we develop, in our childhood and teenage years, and then can continue to add substantive knowledge to throughout our life. But we don't have any automatic guidance on what to do. Our means of survival, which is our reason, does not function automatically. we have to choose to think. If we choose not to think consistently, we just die. We are like an animal failing to use its means of survival. So I really stress this. Our means of survival is our reason. And it is a volitional faculty. We can choose to use it or not to use it. And this has certain moral implications. So if a value is a thing that an organism of any kind acts to gain and or keep, then a moral value is a chosen value. And as far as we know, only human beings can make at least serious choices of this kind. Now, this is the foundation from which Ayn Rand develops the Objectivist Ethics, which I will defend. Now, the alternative to egoism is altruism. The term altruism was coined by Auguste Comte in the 1850s, and derives from when I was making these slides, this was like one of the suggested formats, and it put a slice of pizza when it said Italian, presumably. So, but yeah, it derives from the Italian altrui, meaning other people. And that means living for the sake of others. I've included a painting here which represents, giving alms to the poor. Now, you can ask me about the problems of altruism if you wish in the Q&A. I just wanted to introduce the concept for now. So, in defending the objectivist metaethics, here's probably a quote that you should be familiar with from the Objectivist Ethics. If you like, I'll read it out. There is only one fundamental alternative in the universe, existence or non-existence, and it pertains to a single class of entities, to living organisms. The existence of inanimate matter is unconditional. The existence of life is not. It depends on a specific course of action. Matter is indestructible. It changes its forms, but it cannot cease to exist. It is only a living organism that faces a constant alternative, the issue of life or death. Life is a process of self-sustaining and self-generated action. If an organism fails in that action, it dies. Its chemical elements remain, but its life goes out of existence. It is only the concept of life that makes the concept of value possible. It is only to a living entity that things can be good or evil. So notice that this methodology for deriving ethics from reality follows and accords to the four principles I outlined before. So if we look back at the four principles, one of them is, the second one, I believe, is finding teleological ends in reality, finding things that organisms strive to achieve. Yes? So I skipped a step there. It's only living organisms that act to achieve anything. You can't normatively evaluate the actions of a rock. A rock can do nothing. It will either stay in existence or it'll be destroyed by some external force, but it cannot act in any way. It has no alternative, no life, no values. Conversely, say a mouse in the forest, it does have values. It doesn't choose its values. It probably doesn't have any kind of self-consciousness as far as we know. Probably doesn't make choices in the way that human beings do. But it certainly has values. It has things that it acts to gain and or keep. That's what a value is. It's just something a living organism acts to gain and or keep. And the standard by which it implicitly makes that, takes that action, I won't say makes that choice because as I pointed out, choices are only made by human beings. But the standard by which it will take that action is its own life. That's how the organism evolved to survive. So the standard of a human being's action also has to be their own life. Otherwise, you die. And life is, if the life is the standard of value, well, we also reject any kind of heaven. So if you're dead, that's it. That's the end of ethics for you. Okay, so let's look at how objectivism compares to utilitarianism in the four principles I outlined. So now I'm integrating the first part of my thesis, which is a critique of utilitarian metaethics, the last part of my thesis, the third part, which is the defense of the objectivist ethics, and seeing how they compare according to the middle part of my thesis, which outlines the four principles. It's a little confusing, so I may have to reorganize which order I go in, but let's see. So number one, omit value-laden claims from establishing standards of morality. Does objectivism do it? Yes, it identifies values in reality first, namely the values pursued by living organisms, then proceeds to see how they apply to human beings. So it is not It's not stealing the concept of value. Conversely, utilitarianism doesn't. It steals the concept pleasure from the concept value, which it also steals from the concept life. It's anti-hierarchical. Now, I pointed out in the email that I sent everybody about today's session that I would be talking a little bit about the stolen concept fallacy. That was a fallacy also discovered by Ayn Rand, and I recently discussed it with Harry Binswanger, who I interviewed on my podcast, which you can find on the email I sent. That explains the stolen concept fallacy. I don't have time to go into it now, but if you want, you can ask me in the Q&A. 2, identify teleological ends in reality. Does objectivism do it? Well, the sustenance of each organism's life through self-generated action is a teleological end. Yes? Each organism acts to achieve its own life. We are the only organism that has the choice not to. And that's ultimately the choice of whether you think or don't think, and whether you use your reason as a weapon against your own survival or as your tool of survival, which is, of course, what it ought to be. There is no other tool of survival for a human being. Your primary tool of survival is necessarily your reason. Now, what does utilitarianism say? Well, it just sort of observes that some human beings pursue pleasure. Now, that's a fact, but it says nothing about ethics itself, and nothing follows from it. All sorts of human beings pursue all sorts of different things. You can't infer anything from that alone. 3, how are the ends in principle 2 achieved? Well, objectivism outlines it very clearly. Value pursuit. Here are some examples. A plant turning its leaves to the sun, a lion catching a gazelle, a human being engaging in productive work. Yes, it follows the principle. Utilitarianism does it. It just says in any expedient way possible, without any principles, and whatever the destructive consequences, maximize pleasure and minimize pain for anyone, and the only thing that matters is the totality of the pleasure or pain being felt. 4, invalidate alternatives. Well, objectivism holds that there is one reality. There are no alternative facts. Everything is exactly what it is. A is A. Utilitarianism, I don't believe, has much of a metaphysics. And to the extent that it does, it's probably quite subjective. But you can correct me on that if I'm wrong. It certainly doesn't go into the same kind of... I don't believe it takes the objectivist approach to metaphysics and epistemology. Actually, it certainly doesn't. So what is the... How are we going?
10 minutes.
So now let's compare the two universes. A utilitarian universe looks something like what I've put there in the picture. Everything is a giant trolley problem. Every time you make a choice, you have to weigh how that choice will affect every other, not just human, not just living human, but according to some variants of utilitarianism, every potential future human, and also every living organism with a pleasure-pain mechanism. Now, making a decision such as buying yourself a lunch, as I pointed out in one of my Master of Bioethics essays, becomes a trolley problem of global proportions. Now, I won't even go into the sense of guilt that this will instantiate, but there is no concept of virtue. Life is a giant trolley problem. The whole emphasis of utilitarianism is on other people's suffering and pain, and your life is not to be enjoyed, but to be sacrificed. What's the alternative? Sorry. The alternative is an objectivist universe. Life as the standard of value, virtue as the means of gaining values. Life is a sunlit, exalted adventure. The emphasis is on your own happiness. Your life is to be enjoyed and lived here on this earth. Which universe do you prefer? I know my answer. Thank you very much.